the National Catholic Register. This is Register Radio, bringing light and clarity to the news and topics that affect your life.
The second gathering of the Synod on Synodality at the Vatican starts in a matter of days. The National Catholic Register's senior editor, Jonathan Liedl, will soon be on the ground covering that event. He joins us today with a preview of what we can expect from the Synod discussions. Then we turn to another term about to begin. That's the Supreme Court 2024-2025 term. We have a preview of that, too, with Register legal analyst Andrea Picciotti Bayer. Finally, we get a little levity from the big screen. With Register staff writer Joseph Pronechen, we get a review of a few films that can help us lift our minds to higher things. I'm Jeanette DeMello, Executive Director of the National Catholic Register and Catholic News Agency, and your host of Register Radio.
And I'm Matthew Bunson, EWTN News' Vice President and Editorial Director, and happily co-host of Register Radio. And you're absolutely right, Jeanette. We are now just a few days away from the start of the second edition of the Synod on Synodality that will be running from October 2nd to the 27th. It is the conclusion of what has been a multi-year process launched by Pope Francis to create what he hopes is a synodal church. We still have a lot of questions about what all of that means and what it might entail for the church. And happily, we are joined now by Jonathan Liedl, the Catholic Register senior editor, who has been tracking the Synod and Synodality now for pretty much the same amount of time that Pope Francis has been pushing it. So, Jonathan, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So, what are the biggest changes in the process and structure of the Synod from last year to this second and concluding session?
Yeah, probably the biggest change, Matthew, is not what they're talking about, but what they're not talking about. So what's kind of been removed from the agenda of this session. Of course, last October, there was a lot of focus on questions related to the possibility of women deacons, to questions related to inclusion of people who identify as LGBTQ in the church. Pope Francis has made the decision to create these separate study groups where kind of controversial questions like that will be taken up by a smaller group. So they won't be part of the agenda this October. But other changes that have happened to the proceedings coming up, we have less time for interventions before the whole General Assembly. That was a change announced last week by organizers, which is an interesting point because one criticism of the process thus far is that all the discussions are kept in small groups and participants have less time to speak before the whole assembly. They've also added theological forums that will be happening in October talking about related issues. And there have also been kind of a swap of 25 new delegates, mostly replacing other ones, for instance, in the U.S. Cardinal Dolan will not be participating, and instead the Archbishop of Baltimore, William Lori, will be taking his place.
Yeah, who, aside from being Archbishop of Baltimore, is also the Vice President for the USCCB. So the USCCB's leadership is still being represented there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about the penitential service that's being planned. It caught the eye of a lot of observers that included in the list of the various penitential concerns is what they're describing as a sin against synodality. From a theological standpoint, what's your sense of that?
Well, I think people have pointed out that synodality still seems to be an evolving topic, and it means different things to different people. So it's very, very difficult, I think some people have said, to define what exactly synodality is, what a sin against it is. If it's failing to listen to people, to value them adequately, to respect their gifts, their contributions, that's one thing. But if it's, for instance, questions or concerns or critiques even of the ongoing Synod on Synodality, that's another thing. So definitely a kind of loaded petition, if you will, or
right.
Penance on the eve of the start of the Synod.
Yeah, so you also have a very helpful piece on 7 ways that the Synod on Synodality can, in parentheses, still change the church. I guess that begs the question of, what are the stated goals of the session, and what could the final report actually contain, and what sort of the long-term goals and prospects are?
Yeah, I think this second session is very practical. It's aimed at how to be a synodal church in mission. So the emphasis is on how, right? And so we have an idea of what could be and what is probably very likely to be in that final document produced by the Synod, because the Instrumentum Laboris, the sort of preparatory document for the session, already includes a lot of concrete proposals. Many of them have to do with women's role and place in the church, emphasizing really leadership in any area, in a seminary, in a diocesan institution that doesn't require an ordained man. So that's a big point of emphasis. I'm sure we'll see something on that at the end. There's also discussion of creating a new instituted ministry of listening, so someone who is dedicated to listening to people in the community, especially marginalized people. And then there's also discussion of what I like to say, supercharging Episcopal conferences. So these are regional bishops' conferences. You think of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And it's proposed in the Instrumentum Laboris to give them canonical status and doctrinal authority. So sort of, this is proposed as what part of what Pope Francis has called sound decentralization, so shifting more power to regional conferences, and also lots of questions about how do we involve laity in decision-making, where their participation in something, for instance, like a pastoral council, isn't merely consultative. So that's in the text as well. You asked the question about kind of long-term, like what impact could all these different things have? And I think we see there's really an effort, I think, in the document, you see these different tensions, right, that they're trying to thread a needle between, right? So on the example of bishops' conferences, right, there's this desire to give bishops' conferences more power, right, more decision-making authority, while also there's language about, of course, preserving the unity of faith and morals of the universal church. But I think a number of people will say, they'll look to a situation like Germany, right, and they'll say, well, if we're going to give the bishops' conference in Germany, where the synodal way has been advocating all sorts of controversial and I think plainly heterodoxical changes to church teaching and practice, how will that not inevitably lead to Germany kind of going their own way of these questions? The other example of this I'd point out to is the question of consultation and decision-making. How can lay people have sort of decision-making power while still respecting the hierarchical, really the gift that bishops receive at their ordination to teach and govern? And I think the document addresses sort of both of these elements, but it really is not clear how it's going to thread that needle, or some people might say square that circle.
Right.
So that's something really key to keep an eye on. And I think the concern of a number of people when it comes to these kinds of things is that, maybe we're empowering different parts of the church and different parts of the world to go their own way. And will that lead to something like a schism? Will that lead to significant differences in life of the church? So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. And that's, I think, the final document, and really what Pope Francis does with the final document, that'll be a key kind of interpretive lens.
Jonathan, there's just a lot pending, and so we do look forward to your coverage on the ground there. We're grateful for you spending all that time, a full month, practically in Rome, and we're looking forward to what you bring to us. Our listeners can find Jonathan Liedl's coverage at ncregister.com/synod, and there'll be a lot more coverage besides Jonathan's. We have an EWTN news team that's on the ground all the time covering the Vatican, and then we'll have a few people joining him and that Rome team, the bureau team, in covering the Synod. So, Jonathan, thanks a bunch for being with us.
Great to be with you guys.
You've been listening to Register Radio on EWTN News with Matthew Bunson and me, Jeanette DeMello, and we've been talking about the start of the Synod. Now we turn to another institution starting a new term. October is the start of the new Supreme Court term. And joining us with analysis on this is Andrea Picciotti Bayer, Director of the Conscience Project and a columnist for The Register. Welcome, Andrea.
Thanks, Jeanette, so much for having me on. I've missed you guys.
I know, it's been a long while, but of course we had a break for the summer, and we're about to see the start of a new term. It's the 2025 term, as I mentioned. And you've written a great piece for The Register that's highlighting two very important cases that Catholics should keep their eye on. And really, both of these cases have to do with the well-being of children. And of course, It's a deeply Catholic issue to preserve family and to preserve the innocence of children and youth. And so the first case is U.S. versus Scametti. This questions the constitutionality of state bans on questionable medical treatments for minors who want to change their sexual identity. So it's a quote-unquote transgender case. I think it's the first time this is coming before the highest court of our land. So what should we know about this case?
Well, Jeanette, it's very exciting. I love the court, and I think that it's really should be comforting for all of us to know that the justices are going to take the issue quite seriously. This is a law that was passed in Tennessee that prohibits healthcare providers from prescribing puberty blockers or hormones in order to enable a minor to identify with a purported identity inconsistent with a minor's biological sex. The law also includes surgical interventions, but that's not at issue in this case. So it really does look at the strength of states in order to protect the young people in their jurisdiction, as well as to govern medical care. Usually that's considered a state issue. And you're right that this is the first time that the Supreme Court's going to be looking at the medicalization of gender ideology. A number of terms ago, they looked at gender identity in the context of employment discrimination law. But this really gets at something that's a big issue, particularly as it applies to young people.
Do we have any sense of what the court would do here? I know it's always dangerous to predict what the Supreme Court thinks about stuff like this, but any indications?
You know, it really is a chance for the court to not only address the issue of the state's authority to put limitations on what is happening in the medical institutions in their jurisdiction, but also it looks at constitutional issues. The plaintiffs that are bringing this case are 3 minors who claim a transgender identity, their parents, and a doctor who performs these interventions. They're, not surprisingly, represented by the ACLU. And so we're going to look at issues related to due process, equal protection, parental rights, and how those are limited by the Constitution and enabled by the Constitution. What's very interesting in this situation is the U.S. government, the Biden-Harris administration, is participating in the case on behalf of or in support of the plaintiff's challenge to the law. Right. So it's a little bit of a shocking thing to read the U.S. Briefs to the court in this case, where they're kind of skipping over some really important legal issues and just assuming whatever they need to in order to make the ACLU case possible win for them.
Interesting. I do want to mention, I mean, this is such a divisive issue, the issue of medical care for these young people. And we did a poll, EWTN News, Real Clear Opinion, did a poll just in August, late August, that 50% of Catholic voters do not support puberty blockers and hormone treatments for minors. And so that's a pretty, that shows the division. Doctors and psychologists are also divided. And now, you're seeing the Supreme Court have to take up this case. So it should be something we watch very closely, and I'm glad you're following it. I'm sure we'll tune back in for more as that proceeds. There's that one other case, though, that you mentioned, too, that we can't forget. And this is another case that involves children, and it relates to pornography. So what is the second case that you wrote about that we should know?
So, yeah, it's called Free Speech Coalition versus Paxton. And Paxton refers to Texas Attorney General. Right. Texas passed a law that imposes age verification measures on virtual porn websites. And the plaintiffs in this case, the Free Speech Coalition, it's very, again, represented by the ACLU, and they describe themselves as creators and distributors of adult content and a performer for adult websites. They are saying that these age verification processes infringe on adult use of porn sites, and by requiring too much personal information. And it's very interesting because we've got an issue here about the role of the state in protecting minors, and what kind of standard courts should use to evaluate laws. The lower court, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, said it should just be a rational basis review because this deals with minors and restrictions, and the ACLU is saying, no, it should be a strict review. I tend to think that the state of Texas is right in this case, but we'll see how the court deals with the First Amendment and the limitations of the First Amendment when it comes to the purity and the protection of our young people.
Really, Andrea, this is a very big case. I mean, the Register's been covering the Paxton situation, the situation there in Texas, and how that law has affected the industry. And we noticed many news outlets have written about this, but the Register and Catholic News Agency certainly have just pointed out that VPNs, these are web services that basically hide who you are and where you are, that the use of that grew when these kind of laws are put into effect. And so these laws have real impact. And so obviously the Supreme Court cases will have real impact as well. And so, Andrea, as always, we're very, very grateful for your coverage of the court. We haven't had you on radio in a while, but you're back and the court's back. So thank you again for what you do.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
We are going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be talking to Joseph Pronechen about films on faith and family that you might want to see. Stay tuned for more on Register Radio here on EWTN.
Let's return to Register Radio on EWTN.
Welcome back. I'm Jeanette DeMello, Executive Director of the National Catholic Register and Catholic News Agency, along with Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. And we are joined by Register staff writer Joseph Pronechen, who's been at the Register for a few decades, really. And he's been writing on all sorts of features, but he started off writing as a film critic for his local paper. And he's joining us now, returning to those roots. Joe, we're so glad to have you as our film critic right now.
Oh, thank you, Jeanette. Happy to be here.
So we're so grateful that you've always covered these issues of devotion for our paper, for the Register. But lately, we've had you look at a couple of great films, 2 documentaries. The first one is Shreveport Martyrs. And it's interesting because it's on the Shreveport Martyrs. The film is called The Five Priests, and it's a documentary. And I remember hearing about the Shreveport Martyrs. I live in Louisiana, and I didn't know anything about them, but I do remember hearing about them. Shreveport is a city in northern Louisiana. And I thought, who are these? The U.S. bishops were approving the advancement of their cause, and that was the first I had heard of them. So, Joe, this film highlights these martyrs in Shreveport, Louisiana. Can you tell us a bit more about the documentary?
Yes, it follows these Shreveport martyrs who are 5 priests that came from France. When the diocese was being established in that area, and the church was growing a little bit, and the bishop went himself to France, got 5 priests. Actually, a couple were seminarians, so when they got here, he ordained them. But when they came back, they were very well, welcomed by the people. They started, 2 of them stayed in Shreveport. The other 3 went out to different areas to start parishes. And the autumn of 1873, one of the worst yellow fever epidemics in U.S. history hit Shreveport. And it was so bad that a quarter of the town's population succumbed to the yellow fever epidemic. But these 5 French priests, they stayed. 2 of them immediately in Shreveport stayed to offer hope, even as other people, those were trying to get away. The poor people couldn't, but the ones that had the businesses and all were able to get away from the city itself. But they were working almost 24 hours a day, and they knew they were not going to survive themselves because they didn't know how the fever spread at those times, except that most people that came in contact with those who were sick were dying. When they were really bad, their condition was worsening, they sent to their fellow priests, would they come and help them, relieve them, because they were going to leave the city without priests. And they didn't mind about the faith of the people. They didn't mind about the condition of the people. They just wanted to be with them in their last moments and offer them hope, offer them blessings, offer them absolution. The other priests willingly came immediately, and like one of them said, I know I am going to my death, but it's what God wants. And I have to help the people. And it did not matter, who they were, and they wound up dying, obviously, and have become known as the Shreveport Martyrs.
And that's what's tremendous, Joe, because they're martyrs because of their charity, because of their love. These aren't martyrs who died at the physical hands of someone. They weren't killed in that way. So it is a tremendously interesting story of love, of neighbor that they are representing. And I would say the film won a recognition at the Cannes World Film Festival. And it won other recognitions as well. Let's turn to Father Flanagan. Matthew, you jump in here.
We're talking about causes for canonization. We have another documentary that takes up the story of a priest who is a servant of God, and that, of course, is the beloved Father Flanagan. Remind everyone who he was exactly.
Yes, Father Edward Flanagan was an Irish priest, came to the United States. In Omaha, he was stationed, and he was terribly hurt and moved by the condition of the the poor people, especially of the young people, especially the boys, who number of them getting into trouble because they were either orphans or they had been abandoned in the and just trying to grow up alone. And he said, in one of his catchphrases was that he said there was no such thing as a bad boy if they are only treated properly and grow up in a home. So that was his idea to have these boys grow up in as close to a home atmosphere as possible. And he started taking them in a house that a Jewish friend actually helped him with this at the beginning, set up, but in the city itself. But then he got in trouble because the laws at that time said, there's no mixture of races or anything. And he was taken in, didn't matter the race of the person, whether they were white or black. And even if they weren't Catholic, he would take them in because he wanted to help them so terribly, keep them out of reform school. So when they said, you're breaking the law, he just said, well, okay, I just moved. And he moved out to a cornfield, got a big plot in a cornfield, and that's where he built the current Boys Town. And it all started in 1917. And then by the early 30s, especially during the Depression, when people were going, some boys even traveled from California when they heard about Boys Town to get into Boys Town. They wanted to make something of their lives. And Father Flanagan treated all of them as if they were an only child, in a sense. They didn't say that, but that's what he did. He made sure his mother and his sister came from Ireland to live there, and also helped create the home atmosphere.
It was a family affair, and I know that we even get some of the voices of people who had been there at the time in the film, and and of course you hear the voice of Jonathan Rumi in this film, and so that's a real draw as well. I don't want to forget Monster Summer. So that's the last film here that we're talking about. It's actually a big screen film. It's not a documentary. It comes out on October 4th, and it's a little different. Joe, I know. Can you summarize that in like a minute or less?
Okay, I'll try. It's a family. It's billed as a family movie, but I would say it's best suited for 13-year-olds and up. Simply because there are some really, while it's a mystery of sorts, the monster gives it away, because the monster, the boys led by, three boys and one girl, young teens led by the young boy named Noah in the film, think something strange is going on. They think a witch is responsible for all, and this is from the beginning of the film, for all the paranormal stuff going on in town. And he enlists the help of a retired police detective who's a real loner and has got problems, Mel Gibson. And there's a really great bonding between the two of them first that grows into the story. Noah's suspicions are proven true toward the end, and that's where the film goes quite intense and scary, especially there.
Right.
So they try to, give Jaws a run for its money in some places, but that's what happens.
Give Jaws a run for its money. Well, of course, Halloween is right around the corner, so this one could draw good attention with Halloween there. But I know in this one, the spiritual battle is certainly won by the heavenly power. So that's Monster Summer, October 4th, and it's a family film. Joe suggests for 13 and up. But Joe, all these films, we're grateful for what you do, watching these and pointing us to the good ones. They can be found at ncregister.com by clicking Arts in the navigation bar. Mm-hmm. This is Register Radio on EWTN, and we're asking you to check out the NC Register online always, and thanks for joining us here on Register Radio. Together with Matthew Bunson and my producer, Michael McCall, I'm Jeanette DeMello, and I pray until next week, may God bless you.